With tensions rising, protests on the streets, one presidential election annulled and another just weeks away, I'll speak to Kenya's opposition presidential candidate and the country's former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga. I'm Mehdi Hassan, also on the show. More than 6 years into the war in Syria, and with Bashar al-Assad still firmly in power, is it time for the opposition to admit defeat? And was it a mistake for outside powers to have backed the Syrian rebels in the first place? That's our debate. But first, following protests and legal challenge from the defeated opposition candidate Raila Odinga, the Kenyan Supreme Court annulled a presidential election for the first time in the country's history. The decision was hailed by some as a victory for democracy and the rule of law. But Odinga says he won't participate in the re-election scheduled for next month until his demands for electoral reform are met. So, what's next for Kenya? This week's headliner from Nairobi, Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga, thank you for joining me on UpFront. The initial results of August presidential elections saw you losing to incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta by 54 to 44%. This week, the Supreme Court said it had annulled those elections because they were neither transparent nor verifiable. The court also ordered a re-election to be held next month. You must be delighted to have another opportunity to run for president yet again.
Well, yes, what the court did was the right thing, because, as you know, I know that I did not lose the elections. I know that I won the elections and that the results were just manipulated. So this is what we call an injustice. And the court did the right thing after examining the evidence we placed before it and nullified those elections.
Former Ghanaian President John Mahama, who was the leader of one of the international observer missions in this election, said the Kenyan election system appeared, quote, credible, transparent, inclusive. Kenya has the potential to be the most inspiring democracy in Africa, he said at the time. He's not the only observer to praise your country's election. The US State Department at the time welcomed the transparency, integrity and public confidence in the electoral process, impressed by Kenyans' commitment to ensuring their voices are heard through the ballot box. So you can understand why incumbent President Kenyatta doesn't agree with this Supreme Court ruling. The international observers are largely on the president's side, are they not?
Well, we were very disappointed with the position taken by the international observers. It really brought to question the role of international observation of elections. They did not wait to witness the transmission of the results from the polling stations to the tallying centers at the constituency and also at the national tallying center, where everything went wrong. That was why we say that it was very unfortunate. But the other thing is President John Mahama did not disclose that he had a conflict of interest. He is a friend of President Uhuru Kenyatta.
If the international observers praise October's rerun, will you accept their verdict in October?
I don't expect them to praise. I want them to just be objective. If I win, fine. Even if I lose fairly, then they should say so.
So just to be clear, you are running for president again next month?
Yes, I will be running and subject to certain conditions being met. We have written to the Electoral Commission in which we have given them a reducible minimum which they need to meet for us to participate in the elections next month.
William Ruto, the current vice president of your country and one of your former coalition allies at one time, he asked on Twitter last week in reference to you, for how long will one man unable to win elections continue to blackmail 45 million Kenyans using threats of violence, chaos, bloodshed and anarchy? What do you say to him?
Ruto basically suffers from amnesia, because in 2007 he was with me. He was in the front line fighting against the rigging of the elections, and he is on record saying very many things about what happened in 2017 and 2007. Mr. Ruto actually lives in denial because he himself has witnessed election rigging firsthand.
A fair point. Before the August elections, you asserted that the only way Kenyatta could win and stay in office was if he rigged the vote. Are you going to say that again if he wins this time in October? Because if so, doesn't that make this whole process pointless if you're never going to accept the result?
I say that he could not win except by rigging, and I have been actually proved right. You see that he did not win this time round. He rigged the elections. And I know it from the kind of support that we have on the ground, that he cannot win a free and fair elections. I've got a bigger support base. There's no way that he can beat me in a proper, direct, free and fair electoral
Just
process.
to be clear, they didn't accuse Kenyatta of vote rigging. They said the Electoral Commission was not transparent enough. But just on Kenyatta, President Kenyatta has pledged to his supporters that even if you win the re-election, he will have you impeached within 3 months. Given his ruling coalition is not far from having the numbers in Parliament to do that, how worried are you that even if you win, you're not going to last very long? Your tenure might be over before it even begins.
First, he is saying he did not rig. That is the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission was doing it on his behalf and his behest.
That's not what the Supreme Court said, though. That's all I'm saying. The Supreme Court didn't point the finger at Kenyatta specifically.
Yeah, of course, but he was the beneficiary of the rigging. So actually, you can infer the conclusion. The thing is that this idea of impeachment is very harebrained because there are clear provisions for impeachment of a president of the country. First, there must be a real crime committed by the president. And then it has to go first to the National Assembly, where they must get a 2/3 majority, which they don't have.
At least 28 people have died in the violence that followed the announcement of the election results. 28 people have died. Now, of course, everyone in your country remembers the election you lost in 2007, the violence that ensued then. I think over 1,000 people died at the time. More than 500,000 people were displaced a decade ago. Are you worried that if the October election doesn't go your way, there will be even more violence? Will you be calling for protests again if you lose again in October and you believe vote rigging happened?
No, you see, what we are trying to say is that our democracy in Africa must come of age. The era of election rigging must come to an end. It must be fixed. We cannot just be glossing over it, that you have a situation where the incumbents hold elections every 5 years or so as a ritual, which they must win at all costs, because this basically lead to apathy.
With respect, Raila Odinga, you're not answering my question. If you lose the election in October again, will you call for protests that may lead to violence one more time?
If I lose elections fairly, I will accept and tell my supporters we lost fairly. That's how it is. So we are Democrats. We are not people who want to see violence on the streets.
But you're saying to me, Raila Odinga, that if you lose fair and square, you'll accept the result and you won't protest. The implication being that if you believe vote rigging happened again, which I suspect you will say if you lose, you will call for protests and you will tolerate violence. You will be okay with the violence, to make a point. All I'm asking is, what message are you giving to Kenyans to try and avoid violence in October?
What we are trying to tell Kenyans is that they must be prepared that if they don't turn up in numbers and we lose fairly, we will accept the outcome of those the results. But if there is a rigging of elections, the people are entitled to protest. As you know, our constitution provides for peaceful demonstrations, picketing, strikes, and so on.
You've been the main opposition candidate for 4 presidential elections in a row. If you lose the rerun next month, is that it for you? Will you put aside your presidential ambitions and let somebody else run in your place next time? Someone maybe younger, different surname?
I don't it doesn't have to be me at all. I mean, this time my colleagues are the ones who settled on me as a candidate. So, but we are a movement, and there are so many other people who are capable of running. But if we don't fix this issue of rigging, well, it doesn't matter who you choose and however popular that fellow is, still there will be rigging. So you need to see that the elephant in the room is this manipulation of electoral results. And this is what must be fixed for us to have a proper democratic society. This is what we are talking about, and we are saying that African democracy should not be judged by different standards lower than they are, for example, in Europe or in the United States.
Raila Odinga, thank you for joining me on Upfront.